Hey everybody, it's Mark Vogt with VOGTLAND Outdoors, and in today's lesson I'm going to talk about different ways that you can anchor in order to shoot barebow. But first, the intro. All right, there's two basic ways that you can actually anchor in order to release the arrow when you're shooting barebow. The two styles are actually anchoring against your cheek and anchoring underneath your chin. And we're going to look at some of the strengths of anchoring under your chin because I want you guys to be thinking about this. This is called the Olympic archery technique, that you're anchoring underneath your chin. And it's got some virtues that anchoring alongside your cheek simply doesn't have. There isn't any nice way to say it. There are deficiencies in anchoring along your cheek, the end. There are nothing but strengths anchoring underneath your chin. Even if people say you don't get a full draw, that's not the case. Olympic archers do it all the time. Anchoring under your chin looks like this. You're looking down the left side of the string. You're looking down the left side of the string right here with your eye close in. You're able to look straight over the top of the arrow. You're able to put the tip, in my shooting method, you're able to put the tip of the arrow right smack on the target. Not above it, not below it, not to the left of it, not to the right of it. You're able to look exactly down and put the tip on the target so that when you release, you know that the arrow is in complete alignment with where your eye is going. In sharp contrast, guys, when you're anchoring off to your side like this, I'm looking at you, my target, but my arrow is pointing a different direction, and nothing, you can see it. I have to somehow compensate by leaning over until my nose is in contact with the string. If I decide that I'm going to go and anchor on the side of my face, and even then, there's no guarantee that the arrow is actually going the direction that my eyes are looking. So I'm aiming this way. My arrow is ever so slightly going this way. And what that means is you have to compensate for every single different distance. You have to compensate not only for distance, but now you have to compensate for some left to right misalignment that you've purposely created that doesn't exist when you're anchoring underneath your chin. Let's see what that looks like if I point at a target. You guys have seen me use this technique. Let's say I'm pointing at that 30-meter target out there. If you're anchoring underneath your chin, so that this is right underneath your chin, and you're releasing like this, then this is what your sight picture looks like. Just like that. You literally are looking right down the arrow and putting the tip of the arrow right smack on the target. In sharp contrast, your sight picture when you're anchoring along your cheek looks like this. You're staring right at the target. That's what I'm staring at. But your arrow is going like this. So now you've got to force yourself to try to compensate by shifting off like this. And you still don't know for a fact if that arrow is actually going to hit the target. Back to anchoring underneath the chin. When you're anchoring underneath your chin, your eyeball is in direct alignment with the arrow tip, with the entire shaft of the arrow for that matter, so that this is what your sight picture looks like. That's one huge strength already in favor of anchoring underneath your chin instead of your cheek. Another strength of anchoring underneath your chin, guys, is that you gain range, you gain distance. Let me try to explain. If I'm anchoring and aiming at, say, 40 yards, and this is what it looks like for 40 yards, and I'm anchoring on the side of my face, either anchoring on my cheek like this, anchoring on my cheek like this. Notice the elevation of the arrow. It's the elevation that determines the range, the distance that arrow is capable of going. Since I'm anchoring underneath my chin, I'm pulling the back of the arrow down, which is bringing the tip of the arrow up, which is giving me increased range. By anchoring underneath my chin, not only do I have short ranges, but I end up being able to get incredibly long distances in excess of 100 yards, even all the way out to 120 yards. Notice that angle change. Plus, the accuracy that I have by anchoring underneath my chin and being able to look down the edge, down the arrow itself as I'm aiming. That accuracy also enhances my ability to hit the target at those very long ranges. I don't know if you guys noticed, but if you look at the targets out here, the 20-meter target here, the 20-yard target is considerably larger than the 30, is considerably larger than the 40, is considerably larger than the 50. They're physically the same size target. They're all 36 by 36. They're large targets. But when you look at that 50-yard target out there, guys, it's easily 1/4 the size of the 20-yard target, which means you've got to be incredibly precise when you're shooting like this. You have to be super, super accurate in what you're actually pointing at before you let go. This is the last thing you need, is anchoring off to the side of your face and then trying to figure out on something as small as a 50-yard, a 60-yard, a 70-yard, an 80, a 90-yard, a 100-yard target, and you have to calculate for this error that you've introduced by anchoring on the side of your face. Why not bring the anchor in under your chin, look directly down the arrow itself? No worries that the string is going to come in and tear your nose off if you're anchoring on your cheek and you're still trying to like lean into it. Instead, it's effortless to actually put the tip of the arrow right on the target by anchoring underneath your chin. So there's two reasons, there's two different ways that you can anchor in archery. They call this the traditional method. Let's just call it what it is. You're anchoring at your cheek. I don't want to try to give it any extra credit that it's somehow traditional, and this is not traditional. There have been Olympic archers for 100 years. I promise you, 100 represents tradition. This is also traditional. But this anchoring under the chin gives you two distinct advantages. One, you get that perfect alignment looking over the top of the arrow, and even to the point that where you're able to put the tip of the arrow exactly on the target. And two, you get enhanced range because now you're pulling the back of the arrow down, which means you're lifting the tip of the arrow up, which means you're getting incredible ranges that you would not have when you're anchoring off to the side of your face. There just isn't any two ways about it. There's nothing that I can do. If I anchor on my cheek, I'm limited to about, if I'm lucky, 70 yards. There is no going out to 80, there is no going out to 90. But if you're anchoring underneath your chin, you're able to actually walk the back of the arrow down by string walking, get the tip of the arrow up, and get incredible distances like 100 and 120. Let's do a couple of sample shots to show you the angle the arrow makes when you're anchoring alongside your cheek versus anchoring underneath your chin. If I were to aim at a 20-yard target and I were anchoring on the side of my face, my shot might look something like this. I want you to carefully watch the angle that the arrow actually has. Similarly, for that very same 20 yards, this is what it actually looks like if I'm anchoring under my chin. The arrow is actually much closer to horizontal because I physically lowered the back of the arrow down. It doesn't have to be lifted up quite so high because I'm not way up high on my cheek. More pronounced, watch what happens when I try to aim. I try to anchor on my chin and actually aim at 50 yards. If I'm lucky, this is what it's actually going to look like. In sharp contrast, watch what happens when I shoot at 50 yards and I'm anchoring underneath my chin. The arrow actually has a distinctly sharper angle, and yet there's still room for me to go farther and farther and farther with that angle and still keep the tip of my arrow right smack on the target. So you can see that there's a distinct advantage in actually anchoring underneath your chin than anchoring at your cheek. In fact, there's a third reason why you want to consider anchoring underneath your chin instead of your cheek. When you anchor underneath your chin, your finger, your elbow, your shoulder are forming a strong triangle that never has to actually relax. You're never wobbling out in space making a V like when you're drawing back alongside your cheek. When you're drawing back alongside your cheek, your hand has to momentarily float in the air in order to be able to release. It has to literally float. When it's floating, now it's just a V, and a V is a lot weaker than a triangle. This triangle stays strong the whole time. That when I'm actually holding and pointing at 50 yards, at 60 yards, at 70, 80, 90, 100 yards, I have a very strong triangle here anchoring my hand, and my release looks like this. Doink! I never let go. This finger actually physically never has to let go of my chin, so it remains strong, and when it's strong, it's smooth, and when it's smooth, it's accurate. And the accuracy is what you need when you're shooting out there to the longer distances. Floating your hand out here, trying to maintain some kind of strong, some kind of rigidity before you release while your hand is floating alongside your cheek, it's simply not possible, you guys. Or at least it's extremely difficult compared to anchoring underneath your chin and performing a very controlled release that looks something like this. I'm literally forcing my hand up like this. It would be very difficult for anybody to pull my arm off my chin when I'm anchoring like this. And yet, since I'm putting this part of my finger on my chin, this part is still free to loosen like this, to perform a small motion release and loose the arrow. Let's take another peek at it. This is what it looks like anchoring underneath your chin. I can stay like this for a long time until I get the shot I want. And then release. Watch one more time. I'll see if I can do that floating with my arm. Anchoring on my cheek would look like this. And now my hand is floating in the back here. Eventually my hand has to get away from my cheek just to be able to open my fingers up. I'm going to start to shake. Who knows where that arrow is going to go? But when you're anchoring underneath your chin, you can form a rigid mountain, a triangle, and be incredibly strong before you release. There's three things then that I want you to think about when you're trying to decide between anchoring at your cheek and anchoring under your chin. If you anchor underneath your chin, you're going to form a rigid, strong structure. If you're anchoring underneath your chin, you're going to be able to look down the left edge of the string directly over the top of the arrow for perfect alignment. If you're anchoring underneath your chin, you're going to be able to actually have much higher elevations on your arrows, meaning much farther ranges, and with the strength of that anchoring point, you'll be so smooth that you'll feel confident shooting at 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 yards this way, as opposed to anchoring off to the side of your face, where you lose elevation, you lose strength, you lose the accuracy, the smoothness that's required to actually shoot successfully at 70, 80, 90, and 100 yards. This is Mark Vogt with VOGTLAND Outdoors. I hope you guys found that particular video useful. Feel free to subscribe to my channel, and we'll see you out there. Thanks. Bye.